Welcome, folks, to the South and Sideways podcast on the Urban Sentinel channel. I am your host, the Urban Sentinel. This is podcast episode 00, Prepping, the Good, Bad, and Ugly. Let's get into it. Brief introduction for those of you who don't know who I am. I'm an amateur prepper. I've been on YouTube for about a year and a half, 2 years now, and my primary area is emergency preparedness. Now, on a personal level, I've been involved in prepping for about 30 years, but I am an amateur prepper, and I say that only for two reasons. One, I have not yet mastered all the skills I feel I need to, and two, I've not yet acquired everything that I want to have to add to my entire toolbox of things that I need as a prepper. With that being said, most of my content revolves around gardening, everyday preparedness items, DIY projects, EDC, various things that you would come across, but it's based on the purpose that you're an amateur. You don't have a big bank account. You don't have big sponsorships. You don't have the ability to drop a credit card down on the counter and say, yeah, get me 3 of these, or write a check out for a couple $100 without blinking an eye. You basically have to budget what you have between paying the bills that you need to keep a roof over your head and food in your stomach, and then looking at the things that are going on where you feel that you may need to invest in some items, merchandise, equipment, materials, that sort of thing to carry you through should there be a major disaster or catastrophe, something that you can't just simply take a nap and have it taken care of by the time you wake up. With that being said, prepping as a whole has gone through phases, especially over the last 25 years. I've seen it change from where it was considered an outlier sort of event where you had that one oddball guy in your neighborhood at the end of the street, or that one relative that you always rolled your eyes at whenever they started talking about certain things that were going on, whatever the case may be. But slowly the connection is being made that while, yes, there is the extreme to that in prepping, but there's also the extreme to anything in life that individuals choose to do. There is a larger basis and foundation on things that are more practical, more realistic than what we have been accustomed to. So with that, let's get into it. The downside of prepping, let's start with that first, is just that. The downside is there are people, individuals, groups that still paint preppers, people looking at disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness as sort of being the wackos and the nut jobs, the tinfoil hat people, the ones that they mock and laugh at and are always quick to, put a microphone and a camera on them to say, well, tell us about this bunker that you're building and how you think it'll help protect you from an asteroid that's going to hit. They take the most obscure and almost impossible scenarios and place that into a context with the framing that that individual prepper is under the belief that whatever little things they're doing are going to protect them from that far end. And 99 out of 100 times, that's absolutely not the case. Now, is it not to say that, sure, if you can somehow prepare yourself mentally, physically, financially, geographically to survive an asteroid impact to the planet, that, well, you might not be better off than a lot of other people that weren't prepared? Sure, you could make that argument, but the likelihood of an individual being able to do that with very little resources or even a limited amount of extra help is not really something that is plausible in that relationship. But preparing yourself for earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, tidal waves, huge snowstorm, blizzards, whatever the case may be, chemical factories blowing up, all the things that we actually see on a daily basis happening all around the country, all around the world at any point in time. Now, granted, the news likes to hype up the sensational. So you're not going to see the disaster from every single windstorm, every single tornado, every single hurricane, every single weather event or anything else. You're only going to see the stuff that pretty much does the most damage and takes the most lives, because that's what's going to get the most eyes on the screen watching that newscast. But it's all those smaller things in between, those gaps where after that disaster is over, the smart individual says, okay, lesson learned, this is where I fell short in this aspect, and this is how I need to prepare for the next one. Keeping a realistic understanding that you're still not going to be able to get everything that you want for that particular event should something like that happen again. And with natural disasters, you have the advantage that it's nature. You have a better idea of what's going on in your environment, when it's going to happen, and the things that are going to evolve from that should things get out of control. And with the name of the podcast, South and Sideways, that's exactly what happens. When things go south and sideways, they are way out of control, taking that unexpected turn, and you're not quite sure how it's going to end up. But being prepared for it on multiple levels does make it easier to cope and deal with that. You deal with the stereotype of being that oddball prepper. You deal with the stereotype of being the cause for shortages on the shelf because you're hoarding up and you're stocking up and you're buying this in 10 packs of that and 12 cases of this. You have the misconceptions that people have that it's a waste of time, that whatever disasters occur, obviously, if you're alive, you made it through it, so there was really no reason to prep for it. There's really no reason to prepare for it. And there are plenty of people who can say, well, they're 60, 70, 80 years old, they've lived their entire life, and they've never fallen victim to any type of natural disaster or any other type of hardship, which is fantastic. I wish everyone could have that life. But we also know that there are people, no matter where they live, no matter what time period it is, no matter what's going on, they can't seem to walk 10 feet down a sidewalk without face planting onto the concrete because they're getting hit left and right with all types of calamities. And in both cases, the individual that doesn't prepare but has nothing harmful happen to them and brushes it off as it was just a nothing thing, and the individual that also does not prepare but yet still keeps ending up neck deep into the dog poop, as it were, because they still haven't quite figured out that they need to take a little more aggressive action in getting themselves ready when these things happen. Now, the upside to prepping, and there are far more upsides than anything else, is one, you do learn skills. You do benefit from having more talent available, mentally speaking, resources available. You understand better how to budget, how to plan out. You do broaden your horizon when it comes to alternate forms of whether it be working with mechanical or electrical, construction, clothing, food, everything else. You start to develop a better understanding of seeing things as they are, but also seeing the potential that something has that maybe that's not its original purpose. You can look at it, you almost visually break down objects into some core components that, you don't need this entire device, but you do need this, this, and this within inside it, and you can use it to fix or repair something else. You can start thinking about, ingredients in your cupboards, in your kitchens, of what kind of meals you can make with, these 3 ingredients here or these 5 ingredients here, and see how many ways you can expand upon that. You learn to do small things, little things, repair your own clothing. You start to look at, thrift shopping. If you're not already doing that, that you start to find a lot of good things in the thrift stores, clothing and other materials that most people at some point have said, I no longer need this, wear this, it doesn't fit the kids, I've outgrown it, whatever it is. And, they donate it. But in many cases, it's in good condition. In terms of fashion sense, yes, some things are clearly dated to a certain decade, and you may not find something that fits you exactly right for your size. But in terms of if you just need extra clothing, if you need to pack up some things and you're doing some type of work where you don't want to get the clothes that you paid a lot of money for dirty, wrecked, and ruined, you have something on the side that you can throw on, and it's not going to be a big deal if it gets ruined because you paid pennies on the dollar more or less for what you're wearing. Within the society that we're in, our modern society, there is still that stigma, and I go back to the downside of it, that as a whole, it seems to one extent, even though we've moved farther away from pointing fingers at preppers and laughing, they're still kept in a quiet little circle. They're still in the corner of our social room where, those are the preppers over there. They're not so bad, but, don't hang around them too long. Because what happens is you start falling into that trap of, well, yes, you do have the doomsday preppers. And to a certain extent, in reference to that actual show, I enjoyed watching the show because there were a lot of individuals on there that had a good idea, a good base of, what they would do if. They had certain plans, certain actions that they had worked out, and many of them had the opportunity to either in a dry run situation put them into practice, or later on certain things did happen and they were glad that they had what they had. And it's that skill set, building upon that, learning directly from yourself or from other people, that makes the difference with preppers. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to have the disaster happen to you. You just need to be aware of it. You need to observe how people handled it, both individuals and both the government agencies, wherever it is, and see where the errors were. Because again, if you watch the news will highlight the worst disaster. They'll tell you all the things that went wrong. They'll gladly point out any misgivings or any missteps that the government agencies took. They took too long to get there. They didn't bring the right equipment. They didn't have enough supplies for all the people. They'll point out the small here and there oddball, heroes that pop up. Oh, this person got their, rowboat and they went out and they saved 20 people from the flood. Or this person was able to rescue the animals from the animal shelter by loading them up into a trailer that they borrowed from a Home Depot parking lot, that sort of thing. But it's that ingenuity and that creativity within the prepper mindset that still keeps you one step ahead of everyone else that's standing there clutching the pearls, as it were, as my grandmother used to say, in total disbelief about what's going on. I mean, it's not to cast a dark shadow over it, but when you live in a tornado-prone area, and it's called Tornado Alley, you should always expect that there will be a tornado. If you live in an earthquake zone region along a fault line, expect that there are going to be earthquakes. If you live up in the Northeast where I do, wintertime comes, yes, we may have a mild winter where it doesn't drop below 32 and we don't see snow for 3 straight months. And when it does show up, it's gone within 2 days. And then we have other winters where it rains or snows rather consistently for 3-4 days in a row. And by the time it's done, we have almost 6 feet of snow. These are things that when they happen, they can be mild and easy mannered, or they can be extremely rough and they can be extremely brutal. But making plans and having an idea and learning from the mistakes of the previous event makes it easier. Now, with that, you have the burden of self-reliance, because that's the key thing that it comes down to. You have to be the one to initiate it. You have to be the one to say, all right, this is my situation right now. These are the things that have gone on. This is what I can do. I know I'm capable of. This is something that I should learn, or I need to figure out how to get it done, or know someone who can do it, or at least show me how to do it. And then you build up from there. The self-reliance is by far the hardest thing for people, because one, it comes down to you have to do it. You can have an instructor, you can have videos, you can have all the online webinars you want, but if you're not actually going to do the work, if you're not going to see it through, you're not going to benefit from it. And when it comes down to it, in some cases, it almost seems as if there are more obstacles to being self-reliant nowadays than there were just 5-10 years ago. There are more towns, townships, and counties and states that have regulations about how you power your house. And I don't mean necessarily in some unconventional way, just simply there are places where it is illegal by law, by the state law, for you to have property and be off the grid. It's just, they make it so the power companies, the utility companies always have their hand in your pocket no matter what, because in both cases they get paid no matter what. So they want to make it so that way they can say, oh, you can't live off grid, you can't supply your own power, that's not allowed. They make it so if you have a well, fine, you've got a well and you've got your own septic system, but then they have ordinances that prohibit the storage of water from rainfall, even though it's rain. It falls through the atmosphere, it lands on the ground, and if that ground happens to be your property that you own and that you're paying taxes on, most likely, it should be yours. But yet there are ordinances across many cities, many counties, many states where collecting rainfall is actually illegal because it depletes from the natural watershed of the region that's going to be used for that area. Whether it actually does or doesn't, the total number of houses that may collect water versus the total amount of rainfall across a broader area where the rain's falling because there's simply not a house sitting on top of the ground, I beg to differ on that, but I'm neither a geologist or any other expert in that field. You also find that with being more self-reliant, you tend to ride that line of the authority placed upon the people versus your individual ability to get things done. You start to look at problems that you have and you find the solutions, but unfortunately, many of those solutions require you to go to town hall, apply for a permit, pay for the permit, have an inspector come out, tell the inspector, this is what I want to do, write up the permit. They approve the permit. They give you X amount of time to get a certain amount of the work done. Then they have to come back in to check to see the progress. And then by the time they finish doing all their inspections and they sign off on it, oh, you're good to go. And the project that would have taken you maybe a weekend at the most has taken over 3 weeks to get done. And in many cases, if you go ahead and you do something on your own and then they find out about it, they basically find out that you didn't pay them for the permission to do the work, you end up getting a fine. And those fines can be levied onto your property. You end up paying a lien, and it becomes a whole big issue. In some cases, they can send a court order to have you return to its original condition, whatever it was that you did. And that gets to the point where you are in a challenging situation as a prepper, that especially if you are in a more urbanized area or a suburban area where there are more eyes on you, there are more nosy Nelly neighbors that, just don't like the idea of whatever it is you're doing. They're not sure what it is, but they just don't like it. Having those authorities called on you, or having to go explain to a common council or an HOA what you're doing doesn't violate any laws. It doesn't infringe upon anyone else's rights. It doesn't damage anything else. It's just simply a way for you to live a better, more simpler, self-reliant life. Even when it comes to gardening, you can have gardens in many places, but there are laws and ordinances set up where some places don't allow a garden in the front yard, or a garden can't be closer than X number of feet to the sidewalk, or the garden can't be any closer to any boundary line, whether it be occupied or unoccupied. Various things go on, whether it's livestock that you can or can't have, or what numbers you can have, what you can do on your property when it comes to whether it's controlling waste with compost bins or anything else. And then when it comes down to doing other activities, such as you want to build a bunker, and you want to build a bunker specifically to keep you safe should there be a major catastrophe, and you also don't want people to know about it, well, digging a hole with a bobcat and pouring in concrete and all that kind of stuff is fine, even if you're skilled at doing it. But if you don't put out the proper paperwork and get approval permits by the town so they can have it on record and decide, yeah, you're safe to dig there, even though we know that there's nothing else in that area, that defeats the purpose of you keeping a low profile option for your protection. Some cases you can retrofit things that are already in existence. You can play a little bit with the leeway and the wording of things, but it really comes down to you have to think about what you want to do, what you hope to accomplish, and how little hassle you can move through that process to get it done. Beyond that, prepping as a whole is still very beneficial. There are headaches with it. There are points where you might feel exhausted. You might feel exasperated by everything that goes on, because it's just one of those things where you will never feel like you are completely prepared. You will never feel like you are completely ready. You can have a high confidence that you can handle a certain level of calamity, a certain type of disaster or catastrophe. You can definitely appreciate, when you look back at the steps that you've taken, how much you've improved, whether it be your individual skills or your range of skills and things that you've learned, even if it's just simply sitting down and counting up and going through your inventory to see how many days could you survive if there were no power, no running water, there was no outside services, no infrastructure up and running, everything was completely shut down and everyone was on their own. How long could you go before you started to get worried? And you look at the days on the calendar and you think about that. And that's one of the things with prepping and being in emergency preparedness, is it takes that individual up to a different level in their mindset. Now, with that being said, every individual is just that. You're an individual. You do things the way that you do. You learn at the speed that you learn. You make the mistakes that you make, even if someone just made the same one before you. But if you can find people like you, similar, that want to move forward, that want to survive, that want to at least learn and even help other people learn and become, shall we say, less of a burden, because you'll find that it's not a matter of you want to take people under your wing and follow me, kid, and I'll show you how to do it. It's just simply sometimes you might sleep a little bit better knowing that there are a few more people out there that you yourself helped get in the right direction, so they become less of a problem when a disaster happens. It simply comes down to the more people I feel personally that begin prepping and become more aware of emergency preparedness, the fewer roadblocks that there are going to be in a disaster when I need to get my family from point A to point B. There will be fewer headaches that I'll have to deal with on a certain extent, knowing that there are more people around that know what the hell they're doing, or at least have a better idea of what they should or should not be doing in that particular situation. So I won't have to worry about either being blocked, hindered, stymied, or held back in my progress and my plans of getting my family from wherever we are to someplace safer. And again, it's not necessarily from my perspective that you need to go out and be the helping hand. Helping is great. I have no problems with helping whatsoever. And I look at it this way. If it's not going to do any harm to you, if it's not going to do any harm to your family, you help someone out in a situation, fine. But, you keep your head on a swivel. You have a good understanding of the environment that you're in. And that's the key thing. Think about where you're at, what's going on for that moment, and where you're going to move from that point forward. Because even though you may have good intentions on helping and the person that you're helping is going to be grateful, depending upon what it is, those critical few minutes to few hours, whatever it might be, could be the difference between you making your goal, your destination, if you're bugging out, or if it's getting the supplies that you needed to get that last little top off of a couple of tanks, whatever it is, it may slow you down. So you also have to understand that there's going to be a point where you're going to have to cut your losses. And it not necessarily means that you have to be cold-hearted about it. It just simply may be, hey, I want to help you. I've got to take care of this first. If you're still here when I come back, and I will come back, I will help you then. Now, if you're true to your word and you take care of what you need to do, and then when you get back to that location, they're still there, help them out. If you get back and whatever that disaster was going on, whatever that crisis was going on, they're not there, or they're road pizza on the side of the road, there's nothing you can do about that. You need to move on and get back to whatever it was you were doing. But it comes down to that. With prepping, it's a small step process. It's not going to be quick. Even if you win the lottery and you've got $1 million that you can throw into prepping, yes, you can buy all the gear, you can buy all the gadgets, and believe me, that would be fantastic. You can take the time to go and learn all these skills and have it all set up and ready. But now you've pretty much filled your entire grab bag with everything you could possibly want or need, but you don't have the motivation at that point. You're not motivated for anything, to do anything. You just have it, and there it is, sitting in a closet, sitting in your garage, in your basement, in your car, whatever it is. Whatever skills you've learned, you've acquired them, but now you acquired them all at once, and you're not doing anything with it. You're not practicing with it. You're not moving forward, trying to get better for the next time that you go to take a test or take a lesson. You're just simply, well, I learned how to do this, and that's done. And granted, some skills, some things, once you've learned it, you don't necessarily need to keep doing it, but it is a bigger difference between learning a skill, gradually improving and continuing to practice and getting better at it, versus just getting the basics of it and calling it a one and done. Well, that's it for this one. I want you guys to subscribe, like this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.